So I like to think of it as when I was in school, almost 30 years ago, I was taught that the sole purpose of a corporation is to make a profit for its shareholders. And that was it, right? We didn't have a lot of classes on, well, what are the implications of that profit? And I think today, those textbooks are probably not used in school. I haven't gone back to taking my classes, but those textbooks have probably evolved. And I believe that thinking has evolved. And I personally believe that the sole purpose of a corporation is not to make profit, right? That might be one purpose, but there are many others, and there's implications.
So thank you so much for coming on. Why don't you tell the folks that will be listening a little bit more about yourself and your journey? You are currently the general manager of Snapchat Canada, but would love to know about what brought you to Snapchat, a little bit more about your career journey. What got you to where you are today and what motivated you to get in the tech space?
There's a lot there, and we could probably fill an hour or two on that question alone, but I'll start high level. So I started my career out on Wall Street in New York, working on an institutional equity research desk back when soft dollar trades were legal and stocks traded in fractions, believe it or not, before decimals. That was always I aspired to be on Wall Street throughout my academic career. What happened was I got transferred to San Francisco in the late 90s for the West Coast desk for a more senior role. Sense of adventure kind of took over. I was a more senior role in a satellite office versus a more junior role in the heart of Wall Street. And we all know in the late 90s, San Francisco was a bit of a breeding ground for new technology and new companies. And I got hooked. I started, the weird thing about working on working on Wall Street in California means you work New York hours in California. And stock markets open at 9:30. But those who work in the stock business and in the equity business, they get to the office 2 or 3 hours before the markets open to prepare. So 9:30 New York time, 6:30 California time, Pacific time, 2 or 3 hours before that, you're now 3:30, 4:30 in the morning, which means you're getting up at 2:30, 3:30 in the morning to get to the office. There's no Ubers back then. I didn't own a car, and public transportation wasn't 24/7. So it meant calling a taxi every morning in the pitch black and San Francisco on very misty, kind of foggy streets, cold. Remember being cold a lot. But anyway, the reason I bring that up is because that meant from 1 o'clock on, I was free. So 1 o'clock on, I started going to tech events. I started meeting founders, meeting people, kind of creating new businesses who had ideas that were seeing better ways to do things, so to speak. And I got hooked. So after my full year in San Francisco working on a desk, because I didn't want to pay back my relocation expenses, I tendered my resignation, took a 75, or I think it was almost an 80% pay cut, and joined a young fledgling engineering team to be the guy who could help translate what it was they were doing into the world and help commercialize their products. We ended up selling the business to Pearson, which is the British media company that owns the Financial Times, amongst many other publications. And I got hooked. So all of a sudden, Wall Street, my very nascent career and education in the financial markets was not top of mind, was not important to me. And I started looking to these new technology businesses that were popping up all over the place. And so from there was a few steps. I didn't come straight here to Snap, but most recently, my team and I sold our software business in December of 2018, technology, marketing automation, and technology business. Sold to Upland Software down in Austin, Texas for a sizable all-cash transaction. Felt really good. And I got connected with the Snap team shortly thereafter. And it turned out they were looking for a GM here in Canada. And if I could say many things about Snap, but one of the things I appreciate most about Snap is that we're a big startup. We might be one of the world's largest startups. We're a young company, and we're moving fast. And that very much fits kind of what I like to do and what gets me out of bed every morning. So I'm still in this business. Long answer, sorry, but I'm still in this business because it does get me out of bed every morning. And I think if I could leave any advice to anyone, I always try to remind them, and I know it's hard to see at all times, but if you don't enjoy what you do, you'll struggle. Yeah. You'll really struggle because it's all encompassing sometimes.
Absolutely, man. And you had a chance to work at Google too. So you worked in tech, so Google, and then you worked at Adestra. Was Adestra your own company?
Yeah, Adestra's one we sold. I didn't found a board member. I ran the business, and it was a client before becoming a board member. So I knew them very well.
Cool. Because this is some of the stuff that I'm very interested in talking to you specifically about out. You've had the experience in tech, you've worked in the States, you've worked in Canada. You mentioned the satisfaction of being able to get out of bed in the morning, be happy with what you do. And I can definitely see that for tech, because tech seems to have this brand, especially since almost like Google created this culture of going to work and making it seem like it's super fun and the benefits and the perks and things like that. And the ability to have an impact on so many millions of people is of course amazing. And we're definitely going to talk about Snapchat in the next little bit in terms of like what's going on and your experience there. But I want to get your thoughts on some things that have happened sort of in the recent past and your take on it. There has been politicization of tech and tech companies. There has been lots of criticism of companies like Facebook when it comes to things like fake news, the whole Cambridge Analytica scandal, the issues with Google and privacy and antitrust and competition. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on some of these issues, having been in this world.
Listen, I think, as you build businesses that have impact on society and culture, you have an obligation to the ramifications that those businesses have on society and culture. Like, you have an obligation to be responsible for them. And it's a complex issue. I think you made a lot of valid points. I think it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out. What I'd like to remind people is that we're not all the same. Just because we're all on your mobile phone or on your computer screen, or because you use bits and pieces of these businesses in your daily life, these are all very different companies that have very different privacy policies, that use data very differently, that have different business objectives and even different revenue models. So I like to think of it as, when I was in school, almost 30 years ago, I was taught that the sole purpose of a corporation is to make a profit for its shareholders. And that was it, right? We didn't have a lot of classes on, well, what are the implications of that profit? And I think today, those textbooks are probably not used in school. I haven't gone back to taking my classes, but those textbooks have probably evolved, and I believe that thinking has evolved. And I personally believe that the sole purpose of a corporation is not to make profit, right? That might be one purpose, but there are many others, and there's implications. So I do think that this is all healthy discussion, and I do think that we have yet to come to any sort of conclusion or decisions in the discussions that we are having. And my hope is that we can come together and figure a path forward, because the benefits that these companies offer society, they're hard to take away, right? We're having an interview right now on a video messaging platform. This is not something we could have done not that long ago. And I think we want to have this debate. We want to have this discussion. We want to be able to kind of frictionlessly connect and have conversations, but there are implications. And I think those implications need to be fully understood as best they can anyway, and need to be taken into account and considered as we move forward. I do think probably mistakes have been made. I do think that we should address them.
What's Snapchat doing in this realm to address some of these issues right now?
Yes, again, another good question. And as I said, we're not all created. Not all these platforms are equal. So we all don't have the same terms and conditions or privacy policies. So at Snapchat, there's really no going viral. We have a curated, and by that I mean the content that's on our Discover platform is very different than, say, other platforms. Everything up there is up there by design. So content from third-party publishers like the CBC, for instance, they put it there themselves. We don't scrape it and post it. They put it there themselves, and we have a revenue share model with them where agreed on how we're going to monetize their content. Everything's reviewed by humans, and to be fair, the content that I think you're speaking to that sits on kind of the far left and right of the spectrum land on our platform in any capacity that it could be shared. So I can speak to my friends on Snapchat about my beliefs and my theories and whatnot, but that doesn't go viral. That doesn't get shared beyond my close group of friends that I'm connected to. So it's not much different than using a messaging platform to share that content. It's not going to end up being indexed by a search engine and then there for public consumption. So everything at Snapchat was done with privacy at the heart and the center, right? So messaging is ephemeral. We don't store data. We don't use social graphs, all this jazz that, you hear about in the news. And all the content on there it's like turning on the TV. You know what I mean? It's up there by design. I can't publish myself to the Discover platform, and I work for Snapchat. That's to go through the appropriate channels. So in those channels, in that process, we weed things out.
Okay, so there is a process for like weeding certain things out.
Yeah. Like
Okay.
we don't want that stuff up there, full stop, and it doesn't make it to the platform. So Snapchatters don't see it. And I refer to Snapchatters, I refer to the consumers, the 200 and almost 40, 249, 250 million daily active users on the platform when I say
Right.
Snapchatters. So they're not exposed to that stuff on the platform, not at all. And I think that's a very big point of differentiation with our platform than other platforms.
Interesting.
We're not a
Okay.
UGC platform,
What's UGC?
user generated content. There's areas for that, and that's moderated also. Our platform is curated, and the content are shows. It's like turning on TV. So our shows are scripted and unscripted. They're episodic. They're seasonal. There's some big name actors in there. There's some people you've never heard of in there, and we tend to, we curate it. So yeah, I don't know. It's just a different environment, to be fair. And if you haven't seen it, and that's what gets me. It's like I talk to people all the time, and they're like, "Well, you're social media, so you have these problems." I'm like, "Well, not necessarily. Like, I think you got to take a look at it. Like, when's the last time you looked at Snapchat, and when's the last time if you go and take a look, you won't find this content on the platform. Full stop."
Right. Okay. So that's very interesting. And when Snapchat came out, I remember it came out with a bang. A lot of people used it. Rappers were rapping about it, and it kind of had a brand like it was designed to be almost like a sexting platform, just because the almost instant self-destruct messages. And then we didn't hear as much about Snapchat for a number of years. And then you had TikTok and things like that. So I'm curious to know from you, in terms of where Snapchat is currently, you just mentioned there are 250 million active users still, if not growing.
Still, I mean, that's an all-time high. It's growing. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So what is sort of
daily? That's daily active, not
over
active.
time.
More than that.
Yeah.
If you look at monthly actives, it's significantly higher.
That's amazing. Okay. So what is Snapchat doing right now? Because I know that there was a recent announcement when it came to a new feature. Is that kind of similar to TikTok, where people are able to sort of discover bite-sized bits of people doing different things, and the influencers are actually getting paid as well? Like there was a sort of a profit share announcement with that.
So yeah, a couple things. So one is, I think the ephemeral messaging, like when you speak to like what that means, and when people assumed because it disappears, people are doing nefarious things, I think that speaks more to human nature than Snapchat's platform, first off, and where people's heads go and minds go when they think that something's not permanent. The idea of it not being permanent is that it's a communication, like most of our life's not recorded, right? Like, when we cross each other on the street and we say a few words to each other, catching up, or if we're sharing an office or at a coffee shop and we connect for 10 minutes or wherever it might be, it's often not recorded. So the idea of everything being recorded on this planet is a bit scary. I don't think we want to live in that world. And personally, when things are recorded, you behave a little bit, right? So when you're posting a picture that is going to live forever, you want to maybe post your best picture. But when you're posting a picture that you're using to communicate how you're feeling in the moment, and you know that it's not going to live forever, you may be a little bit more real. So that's the ephemeral nature. That's also why we introduced augmented reality to help in that kind of picture and video communication. As far as Spotlight, which I think is what you're referring to, we introduced Spotlight just recently. It's a new way for sure for Snapchatters to share content with the Snapchat community, curated platform, which is very different than other platforms that may or may not be similar. Remember, just because something looks similar to a user, to a consumer, to a Snapchatter, to whatever it might be, doesn't mean the back end's similar. So to get content into the Spotlight feed, it's manually and human curated. And again, we're pulling things that are political in nature, or you could imagine we wouldn't want to see up there. And yes, if you do get a certain number of daily views, I don't have the number in front of me, I think it's like 100,000 or something like that, we are sharing $1 million this quarter with those Snapchatters, divvied up by how many views they get. And it's interesting. So the idea is, like, it's an entertainment platform. It's located on the 5th tab of the Snapchat app. So it's siloed, right, from the other content. And it surfaces the most entertaining snaps from the community in a space that's designed, I would say, with Snap's values, kind and creative at heart, kind, smart, and creative at heart.
Nice. And in terms of Snapchat's expansion and future plan, I'd love to hear like any insights you have about what's happening right now in Canada in terms of users, and if there are any other plans that are slated for the next little while.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Canada's a core market for us. We have a significant team here. The team encompasses our business solutions side as well as engineering and design. We launched in Canada 4 years ago with the acquisition of Bitmoji, Canadian Torontonian company that has only grown. It operates independently from the rest of the business. There's integrations, obviously. Bitmoji also similarly is around, helping facilitating communication amongst friends, family, colleagues, so on and so forth. So yeah, I think we're going to continue to do more of the same here, which is continue to be local, be present, and be available to the community. We reach there's a significant number of Canadians between the ages of 13 and 35 on the platform. You're talking, 75% or so. So big numbers. And they use the platform to stay in touch with their friends and their family and their colleagues, which I think today has never been more important. And we get some pretty good feedback here. And yeah, I think we'll continue to do what we're doing, which is support this market and be present.
Cool. In terms of you and your career, Matt, so where do you sort of see yourself going in the next few years? And if you had any sort of advice for people trying to get into the industry, what would you advise them?
Good questions. So having a North Star is super important, but it doesn't have to be super specific. So for me, what's important to me? Toronto is important to me. It's where my kids are born. It's where my wife and I live. I'm not originally from Toronto or Canada, but I have made it home and I plan on being here forever, which feels good because Toronto is a city that, 55% of Torontonians, 54% of Torontonians are not from Canada. So I feel I'm at home here. Large tech community, growing tech community, diverse populace. I feel like I've lived on 3 continents. I've worked on 4, built teams on 4. That was my favorite place, bar none. So for me, whatever I do, it'll be here. And to be fair, I look at Snap and I think about our value prop and our and what it is we want to do, what we're looking to accomplish in the future. We got a lot of things we haven't done yet. So I think Snap's going to keep me busy for a very long time. I found a home, which is awesome. I think one of the things I've found homes in my past and they've lasted for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years. So I'm a year and a half in almost. I think I got a good run in front of me, I hope. As far as what more advice for those starting out in the space or even those who are been in the space for a decade or more, besides enjoying what you do, which I think is paramount to success. And I do hope that everyone can find something in their life that they enjoy to do. It's not easy. You may strike out a few times on the path there, but that kind of couples with 2 other principles, which one is patience. Patience is a virtue is the quote, but it's so true. Even in the world of tech where things move exceptionally fast and where I believe you need a steep learning curve, sometimes it feels like things aren't moving fast enough for some of us. And 2, resilience, don't give up, right? Like, I guess it's hard. There's a lot of really smart, intelligent people out there all striving to do similar things. So like you can't give up. If you have a few setbacks or if someone else gets the role or if whatever it is, you got to stay at it. Success comes to those who I believe are patient and who don't give up, right? Stay the course. I think that's some kind of high level advice. I would say doing what you're doing is super important. Networking, connecting with individuals, getting to know them, building that network of people that you know a little bit better than a LinkedIn profile or a Twitter handle, but that you actually know and you spend some time with is paramount as well. I still strive, which is one of the reasons, we connected. I still strive to connect with 3 new people every week. And I would say on some weeks I'd meet 10 or 15, but if Friday comes around and I haven't connected with 3 people, I'm pretty tough on myself. And I think no matter wherever you are in your career, you need relationships. It's too important.
Yeah. And networking is so key, especially now when it comes to especially people of color. Some of the events of the past few months that have really highlighted some of these issues when it comes to people of color in the workforce, especially following the George Floyd incident, is diversity in tech. And as we know, when it comes to getting certain positions and moving into the tech world as well, one of the big challenges, especially for people of color, is that they oftentimes, even when they try, they don't have the networks that many others do and have the opportunity to access. And I know that a lot of tech companies are doing certain things, and there's a lot of companies that have started to hire directors of diversity, equity, inclusion. But, it seems like there's more to that. When we start looking at the issue as a whole, it's of course nuanced, and there's so many different things to address when it comes to equal representation within the workforce. But tech particularly has been known as a kind of place where it's been not so much about what you know, it's been about who you know. And that's kind of what has kept it not as diverse. And I know that things are changing now. Just wanted to get your take on this very important issue, because I know a lot of folks who are well qualified, but they just unfortunately don't know folks. And again, you are, as you mentioned, we connected off of LinkedIn because of your own sort of personal goal to meet new folks. But I know that there's a whole bunch of other folks, you know, ask them for 5 minutes of their time, and folks are busy. I get it. And they get a lot of those requests, but it is very, very difficult to find people who will give another person who they haven't met the time of day.
Agreed. And I agree with everything you just said, to be fair. And first of all, I find it unfortunate. I think one of the things that bothers me the most is what I call ghosting, which I called way before I worked for a company that embodies the ghost, so to speak. But first of all, I think it's very hard to reply to everyone at all times, but I definitely strive to respond, if not 100% of the time, I strive to be there. And I often, sometimes you wake up in the morning and there's, 80 inbounds and maybe one. Like it happens, not intentional. But that's my don't give up thing. If you haven't heard back, hit a reply again, say hi, because it's probably, at least with respect to me, it's not by design, it was a mishap. As far as diversity, inclusion, and the events that have transpired, not just over the last few months, but over the decades, listen, we've hired a director of diversity and inclusion. Her name's Una King. You may recognize the last name. I highly recommend taking a look at her and her background. We have not done enough, at least we don't feel, the execs at Snap feel like we can do more, and we are in the process of doing more. It's a number one, agenda item, OKR, KPI, whatever. Toronto is a very diverse city. People of color are a significant representation throughout the city. I like to think that the team that I've hired and the team that we have here are becoming more representative of that diversity over time. I was impressed with our prime minister when he built his cabinet. I do think these things need to be discussed, talked about, and they can't be swept under the rug anymore. I believe we're at an inflection point and not just a bump in the road, so to speak, but that doesn't make any of it any easier. And there'll be these prejudices in the market that need to be identified, discussed, and overcome. So this is a process. We've inherited this process. We've contributed to it, I'm sure, in some capacity over our careers in one way or the other. But I believe, this is, we're focused on it. The Black North, the pledge is something that I find, I love seeing companies sign that. I think we're moving in the right direction, and it can't be, again, like tech, and sometimes things can't move fast enough for those of us who like things to change quickly. I don't believe we're moving fast enough, but I believe we are gathering connecting the dots, and that we will one day be in a world where this is not as much of a headline issue, a general kind of issue as it is today. I just don't know how long that's going to take, and it depends how you measure it, like society as a whole versus verticals or industries and versus communities. It's tough. So I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you absolutely did. And thank you for that. Yeah, I know a lot of companies are definitely doing their part to start addressing some of these issues in a more sort of robust fashion. So it's good to know what's happening at Snapchat. And I'm very happy to sort of learn about Snapchat's new initiatives and just sort of business offerings. And your journey has just been very interesting to know about, from Wall Street and from the US to Canada, and then also calling Toronto home. And in terms of Toronto, what is it, out of all the places you've lived in, what are some of the things that really stuck out to you about Toronto that you love, and why have you decided to call Toronto home?
Yeah, it's a good question. When I moved here about 7 years ago, I was told I was moving in the wrong direction. I said I like swimming upstream. So
Is it because of the cold?
No, I think for a long time, people in the industry that I'm in, tech and media, I wanted to move to New York, LA, London, or a city where there was a more robust industry, more happenings, so to speak.
Yeah.
So for me, it was a confluence of reasons why I moved here. But what's kept me here is what we discussed before. It's the diversity, it's the tech scene, it's the people. I'm a people person. I always think the thing that scares me the most is being locked in a room and not being able to communicate with people anymore. That to me is that'd be the end of me. And I have met and made so many relationships here, friendships, business relationships. I've been so impressed by the people of Toronto. I don't know why anyone would ever want to leave, to be fair. And I was born uptown in New York. I was in city. I spent time in San Francisco and LA. I've worked in London. I've funded myself all around the world through jobs, giving up a lot to be exposed to communities like in Hong Kong or Sydney, Australia, or Tokyo. And while those are all amazing places, Cape Town, Buenos Aires, they're all amazing places. None of them felt as home. None of them felt like home. They all felt like I was visiting. And when I moved here, I quickly started to feel like I was at home. And the funny thing is it's only an 8-hour drive from where I was. It's not that far, but it was never really on my radar before. So some people say maybe it's just my time in life. You know, I was at a certain age where I was ready to kind of settle, and this happened to be here. Others say, you know, my wife's Canadian, so she made me feel more at home here in Canada. She's from Montreal, but she moved here to Toronto when I moved here from New York. So we both kind of established ourselves in a new city, gave up our lives in those cities to create a new one here.
You met at the halfway point.
Yeah, so to speak. Like, it's kind of halfway, but it was actually her father's idea. I had not considered Toronto, and then I started doing my diligence, which I love to make decisions and move forward, to make smart decisions. So I like to at least assess the information that I have available to me before I check the box and make that move is. But yeah, there's so much to be proud of in the city. Not at least, you know, it's some of our teams and it's awesome. I believe, and again, when you think about the future and you think about where you are today and where you want to get at some point in time in the future, Toronto shows a lot of promise, right? Definitely. Toronto hasn't yet matured. It hasn't yet gentrified. It hasn't yet, it's got a long way to go. And if anything, and if it can, the utmost compliment I can give Toronto is that it reminds me a lot of New York City when I grew up in New York 45 years ago when I was born. Grew up probably 35 years ago. But it reminds me a lot of New York I fell in love with when I was growing up. That New York is not that city today. Very different city. It's not a great city to get ahead in, to be fair. There's a lot of entrenched individuals and institutions, whereas Toronto feels like the city of the future.
Yeah, and to be honest, there's still a lot to be improved and worked upon, and you know, Toronto still unfortunately carries that brand of being the screw-face capital in terms of supporting its talent, where you have a lot of folks who actually have to leave to the States to get appreciated and then get appreciated by Torontonians afterwards. But there is still a lot to be proud of, as you mentioned, because one of our biggest things is our diversity, which contributes to diversity of thought as well. And in terms of the communities, there's no other place that I've been into, whether it's visiting or travel worldwide, that has the type of diversity in talent, in thought, in food that Toronto does. So in many cases, it is absolutely underrated on a global scale. I think more and more, though, that brand is being improved with the celebrities that we generate and the more press that comes our way, and the upcoming movie, The Man from Toronto, as well, with Kevin Hart, looks like it's going to be a lot of fun too. So absolutely, Toronto is an amazing place to be, and it's becoming like a tech hub north, which is very, very cool, given, you know, Snapchat, Google, and all these other companies.
Yeah, well, so a couple of thoughts there. We launched a show called Coach Kev on Snapchat with Kevin. Highly recommend checking it out. Two, the food scene is off the charts, and coming from my wife from Montreal, me from New York, we thought we knew food. It's better here. I could use a little more Mexican food. I'm looking for some good, real, authentic Mexican. I miss that from my old Southern California days. I think that's an opportunity here. And three, you're right. Maybe that's what it is. It's the diversity of thought. It's the idea that I encounter you might have touched on something I hadn't thought of. And my conversations with Torontonians over the last 7 years have been nothing but inspiring, and they've been varied as they can be, right? And I like that. It's interesting, when I spent time at Google, as you mentioned before, when Google was creating with the YouTube influencers and creators, right? When we started looking at the data, one of the things we found was Toronto. The vast majority of the top creators, like Superwoman, Humble Poet, or Unbox Therapy, or whoever it was, came from Toronto. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, you got your Drakes of the world, but that was interesting. Like, of all the cities in the world where they could see such a large confluence of influencers across a variety of topics, right? They're not even competing with each other, different audiences. It was Toronto. Imagine that. So I'm with you. And it's funny because that was one of the first things I learned about Toronto. And I was very impressed. I was a little bit shocked, but now I know why. So I think it's the diversity of thought that brings all these great people together.
There you go, man. Well, Toronto is lucky to have you. Matt, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate having you on, and it was a pleasure. Let's stay in touch.
You got it.